Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into one of the Bible's most beautiful and, frankly, most baffling books, the Song of Songs. We're going to be drawing on the research of biblical scholar Dr. Lloyd Carr to understand how this incredible poem, which celebrates passionate human love but barely mentions God, even made it into the Bible in the first place. So let's get into it.
Okay, let's just get right to the heart of the puzzle, right? How did a passionate, and let's be honest, a pretty steamy love poem end up in the Bible? I mean, this isn't a book about religious law or covenants, it's about longing, desire, and physical love. And that fact has confused and fascinated people for literally thousands of years. And the language, it's just undeniably powerful. Just listen to this famous line, "Set me as a seal upon your heart, for love is as strong as death." This is the language of raw human emotion. It's intense, it's deeply personal, and it feels like it's from a whole different universe than all the laws and genealogies, which is exactly what makes it so interesting.
So yeah, that brings us to our first section. We're going to unpack its status as a truly puzzling poem. For millennia, religious thinkers have wrestled with why this text was included in the Bible at all.
For centuries, the go-to solution was to just call it an allegory. Religious leaders would argue, oh, it's not really about a man and a woman. It's a metaphor for God's love for Israel, or later on, Christ's love for the church. But as Dr. Carr suggests, this whole approach might be missing the point entirely.
So if it's not an allegory, then what is it? Well, according to Dr. Carr, the key is to unlock its poetic code. Instead of trying to force some religious meaning onto the text, we need to understand it on its own terms, as a masterful piece of ancient poetry that plays by its own set of rules.
And the most important rule of the game is something called parallelism. Now, you got to forget about rhyming words like we do in English poetry. This is all about a thought rhyme. The basic idea is that a thought in the first line gets repeated or expanded on, or maybe even contrasted in the second. It is the absolute hallmark of ancient Hebrew poetry.
And you can see it perfectly right here. The line, leaping upon the mountains, is followed by bounding over the hills. See? It's not two different things happening. It's one single, powerful image of an approaching lover, just painted with two beautifully similar brushstrokes. That, right there, is parallelism in action.
Okay, so once we get its poetic style, we can place it in its proper context, which is a world just full of ancient love songs. It turns out the Song of Songs wasn't written in a vacuum at all. When we compare it to poems from places like ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, its familiar patterns and its unique genius really start to pop.
All right, now just listen to this little snippet from an ancient Egyptian love poem. It says, "The voice of the turtle dove speaks out." It says, "The day is breaking." So you've got a specific bird signaling a specific time. Got it? Now compare that to the Song of Songs, which uses the exact same image. The voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. This is no accident. This was a shared poetic symbol that everyone in that part of the world would have understood meant the arrival of spring, and of course, the season of love. Here's another one from Egypt. A woman is praising her lover, saying, "Please come quick, like the king's steed, the pick of 1,000. Back then, comparing your lover to a prized royal horse, that was the ultimate compliment. The Song of Songs does something really similar, saying, "I compare you, my love, to a mare from Pharaoh's chariots." But, and get this, here's the genius twist. Turning a mare loose among a bunch of stallions was actually an ancient military tactic to throw an enemy chariot charge into total chaos. So, it was the ultimate symbol of distracting, just irresistible sex appeal.
Pretty clever, right?
And these parallels go way beyond just a few images. Across this entire genre of poetry, we see the same things over and over. For instance, the woman speaks about twice as much as the man. They use this really intimate I-thou language. They face all these obstacles to their love, and they use pet names like sister or brother as terms of endearment.
But just when we start to think, okay, so the Song of Songs is just another ancient love poem, Dr. Carr points out all the ways that it's actually different. And these distinctions, this is where its unique message really shines through.
And this is really where it carves out its own identity. While all its neighbors' love poems were often tied up with fertility cults and religious rituals, the Song of Songs is completely secular. It keeps a clear line between the creator and creation. And maybe, most important of all, it focuses on a strong, exclusive, committed bond, which was a huge departure from a lot of the surrounding literature.
In fact, this poem is so secular that scholars can only find one single, highly debated potential reference to God. There's this phrase, a most vehement flame. Now, in Hebrew, you could technically read that as a flame of Yahweh, but it's much more likely it's just a way of saying a mighty flame, kind of like how we might say a heck of a storm. It's just a superlative.
But the uniqueness of the poem goes even deeper than its themes. We also have to face the mystery of its words, which, well, it's a huge challenge for anyone trying to read it today.
Get this, for a tiny little book of just 117 verses, the Song of Songs has 470 unique Hebrew words. To put it mildly, that vocabulary is incredibly dense and incredibly unusual.
And just look at this breakdown. A full 10% of its words appear only once in the entire Bible. Another 11% appear fewer than 5 times. I mean, this isn't just rare, it is a translator's nightmare. For so many of these words, we're really just making an educated guess at what they mean.
So what does that mean for us, reading it today? It means that in 99 out of the 117 verses, there's at least one word where scholars are still debating the precise meaning. We're reading this beautiful, beautiful poem where the exact nuance of nearly every single line is still up for grabs.
So after exploring its context, its style, and all of its mysteries, what should we really take away from all this? How do we put all these pieces together?
Well, first and foremost, it's masterful love poetry. It shares a common toolbox of literary tricks with its ancient neighbors, for sure, but it totally stands apart because of its secular nature and its profound focus on fidelity. And of course, its rich, incredibly rare vocabulary makes it both beautiful and endlessly mysterious.
And all of this leaves us with one final, provocative thought. Why would a sacred text include a poem that celebrates human love so passionately, yet stays almost completely silent on God? Well, maybe its inclusion isn't some puzzle we're supposed to solve with an allegory. Maybe it's a statement in itself. A celebration of human love is a profound, powerful, and essential part of the created experience, a mighty flame in its own right.